What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Jack Ramsays, Danny Marang, Brandon Sprague. Everybody telling me to check my muted mic. Let's see. No, I'm getting green. So hopefully we're good here. It's Sunday afternoon, a little bit earlier than we normally go, but well, it's not a normal off season. So, what's up, Brandon?
Hey, how we doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just as a forewarning, everybody. My wife is currently out and about right now, so I am puppy sitting.
Oh, yes.
The door is open, so
yes.
You will hear them bark. You will hear them chase each other around. You will hear them go completely insane. But that's just the nature of the beast. So, you know.
I'm getting excited, dude.
For puppies?
Puppies I always love.
Okay.
I always got time for puppies.
Right.
Yeah, we've got, T-minus 2 weeks here till we're getting to that spot. Less than.
And I might come in and maybe sit in with you this week. Who knows?
I hope we know. Do we know? Is that still who knows? Because I need to know.
Yeah, no. So I'll be in with Brandon Thursday morning. We'll do some NBA draft stuff on 1080 in the morning.
Yep.
It'll be Michael Keefe says, "Ooh, the PTI layout." Not gonna lie, it's exactly where I stole it from. It's what I grew up on, and I was like, you know what? That's a rundown style that I like.
PTA rundown or PTI rundown. Every single person in media steals that rundown. That show is one of the more iconic.
Perfect.
Game-changing sports shows in television history. Everybody steals from that show.
Yeah. So 100%. That was the idea behind it. Is I wanted to do kind of a rundown, but I was like, how do I want to do this without it being overly just intrusive? So this is ultimately what I went with, and I just realized that with this red background on and me with a red hat and a red hoodie on, there's a lot of red going on here. So I gotta kind of avoid that going forward, I guess.
I'm glad I decided to put the white tee on. I almost had a red shirt that I was like, I go a little red today, and I'm like, nah, I'm gonna go with the white. Yeah, no, I mean it's just one of those things. We have a lot of really good questions in today. I solicited some on the Jack Ramsays account, and you guys did not disappoint. You guys sent in a truckload of them. Let me pull that up real quick because I just went back on the channel. Where did it go? My goodness, you'd think I have a whole stuff prepared. There we go. Jared Callie over at KGW, friend of the show, good dude, sent in a tremendously good question that I've gotten in some form one way or another, that the idea of it, like what does a good offseason look like, but even more than that, what's next? And maybe that's getting too far out in front, Brandon, but I wonder, like, I don't want to count chickens before they're hatched, right? But okay. What does it look like? And let's get Jared's exact question here. Let's assume, perhaps foolishly, again, that everything goes well this offseason. Anunoby, Collins, a solid MLE signing. How good are the Blazers next season? And what's the next step at the deadline or next offseason to go from good to great to contention? How would that play out? When you're putting this all together in your head, what does that look like to you? Well, I mean, let's unpack the first part of this. If everything pie in the sky goes your way, you get John Collins for relatively cheap because him and Atlanta are kind of reaching a divorce part of this, and it seems that they are. Mm-hmm. And then you get OG, a solid MLE. To me, and I might differ from a lot of people here, I view that team as a top 5 team in the West. If we're talking about a healthy Damian Lillard, and we're talking about Ant kind of figuring out what his role is kind of with a group like that, I think OG comes in and pushes Ant as the number 2 on this team, if not takes it. I'm not mad by that, by the way, and I don't think that needs to be a shot at either player. But in my mind, when I look at the Western Conference, I just don't put a lot of eggs in a lot of baskets. I don't think the West is particularly strong. Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens between Boston and Golden State. But if Boston wins, that's not going to shock me. I think the East is better anyway. But the top half of the West, Golden State, we know they're going to be back. I'm not going to say Phoenix is completely out of it. I think they'll contend at some level. I know some people want to keep Dallas in there, even though they don't have a solidified number 2 with Luka. You could throw the Grizzlies back in. They had a great season. They were the 2 seed. I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways you can go with this, but I just don't view the West as particularly deep. And I'm not ready to give the New Orleans Pelicans the Western Conference title because they made a play-in because Paul George got COVID. I'm also not ready to put a lot of stock in the health of one Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. San Antonio, not buying. So I just think you look at kind of the bottom half of the West. I think that team right there, John Collins, OG Anunoby, Ant and Dame, like to me, that's a pretty solid 4 of a 5. And then I guess you'd assume Nurk is coming back.
Yeah.
That's a top 5 team in the West to me with a healthy Dame.
I don't I don't think I can argue with that. I think that's definitely a really good offseason. And realistically, if the Blazers bring in basically anybody but Jerami Grant, if anybody that's been named, that's the OG Anunoby, John Collins, Deandre Ayton.
Yeah.
It would likely be the best move name-wise in prime type player that the franchise has ever brought in outside of the NBA draft. Like that's it. Which is kind of crazy to think about, that this franchise has been so successful without really being able to bring guys in either via trade or via free agency. But that still doesn't get you from A to Z. And that's what I think what Jared is kind of getting at is, even as good as they, I don't disagree. I think that puts them firmly in the top 5.
Yeah.
But the gap between 1 and 5, I think, is still pretty significant. Because I think Denver is, if they get healthy, is a phenomenal team waiting to happen. I mean, them adding Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray back to that team is, let's be honest, that makes them quite a task to take over. Golden State, I think, is showing possibly some weaknesses. Draymond, over these last couple of games here in the NBA Finals, he may be aging out of his role, which is kind of crazy to think, because he looked like he might have been coming back to it. Phoenix, if they lose Ayton, if they maybe move off of Cam Johnson to try to avoid his free agency, like, what does that mean for them? You know, I kind of wonder. Utah, they're very much shopping Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, and I just did a hit in Utah, not to interrupt you, but I just did a radio hit in Utah on Friday, and I know one of the hosts down there, and he's a good dude, and, you know, he asked me a Jazz question about Terry Stotts, and I straight up said, man, if you're looking for a really good players coach, great offense, Terry's your guy, right? Had a great run here in Portland. And he basically responded, was like, offense? Brandon, we don't need offense. This was a top 10 offensive unit. Defense is their problem. They used to be a defensive team, now they're not. And I go, well, but if you're choosing Donovan over Rudy,
you're choosing offense.
You're choosing offense. So, like, and that's why I don't, name Utah. It's like I don't know what Utah's expecting, nor do we even know if Donovan, by the way, wants to stay there. I know some people didn't read into his messaging and his less than enthused about what they're doing stuff.
Shout out CAA.
Right. I know they viewed it as more of a he wants the bag and he wants to be the guy, but like I don't trust it. The noise has been heavy on Donovan wanting a big market for 2 years now.
Yeah.
I just don't trust the longevity of that situation. I told him I thought they should build around Rudy, because I think what you're seeing in the finals and throughout the playoffs is when you have an elite defense, man, you got a lot of guys in this league that can get buckets. And that's not to discredit Donovan. That's just to simply say, if you're worried about your defense, why would you be choosing Donovan over Rudy? Donovan doesn't put the effort in on that end the way that Rudy does.
No, and I don't disagree. And I guess it's hard when you've got 40-ish million tied up in Rudy Gobert, as opposed to the Celtics having, 40 million tied up in, total in Time Lord.
Yeah, right.
That definitely is a bit of a significant trade-off. But again, this is kind of just sets the table for where the West is right now. And honestly, the rest of the NBA, you and I have talked about this really a lot over the last year, the idea of what this hat is driving me crazy, screw it. What the KD Warriors did to the NBA, and what expectations were, what a team really looked like, right? Mm-hmm. And I just don't know if you look at the NBA right now and it's like, well, I don't know if it's really a great team or a great place for the NBA right now. I don't know if this, that, or the other. This is what the NBA used to be like before the Warriors had KD, Steph, Clay, and Dre. Was that, yes, you would have a dynastic type team, but not something you couldn't overcome. The Bucks, or excuse me, the Celtics could be overcome. If Chris Middleton's healthy, the Bucks are likely in this position right now.
I think the Bucks are winning the chip if Middleton's healthy, right?
And it's nothing to take away from the Celtics, but they could barely hang with the Bucks, who were shorthanded.
Yeah.
The Warriors, as good a team as they are they?
They got lucky that Phoenix broke. I mean, quite frankly, I'm not saying they look. I wanted Phoenix Golden State so bad, Danny.
Just for the memes.
But and look, Luka and Dallas, you give them all the credit. I think you can say these things without taking credit away. But if we're just talking about rosters as they currently were constructed, you can't tell me that Phoenix isn't pushing Golden State more than what Dallas did.
Yeah, I think Dallas was kind of cooked there at the end. But again, this is just
absolutely.
to get back to where the Blazers are. Let's say the dream scenario comes together and they get Collins and Anunoby, which would be a monster offseason. Dame, Ant, OG, John Collins, Yusuf Nurkic is their roster. They keep one of Hart or Nasir, Watford, Greg Brown, a second-round pick, an MLE, and perhaps the BAE. And then you fill that with vet minimums. That's a good team. That's a really good team. Again, healthy, you've got Dame probably averaging 28 a game. You've probably got Ant at 20 a game. You've probably got OG at 18. You've got Nurk at 14 or 15. You've got John Collins at probably 17 or 18. Like, your offense is otherworldly, most likely.
Should be.
You have 5 guys who can go out and get stuff done for you. Defensively, you're still going to be weak in the backcourt. Ant has to show his growth. Dame has to show he's committed on that end. OG can be the first point of attack defender you have had since Wes Matthews. John Collins, while he earned his reputation as a poor defender in his first 2 years in the league, has actually grown tremendously on that end. He's actually above average on that end now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And Nurk is passable. Like, you can only play one way with him, but he's really good at that one way. Like, you're going to play drop coverage through 82 games. Now, when you get to the playoffs, things get a little bit dicier. But if you get coverage behind him with an MLE, like you go get a Jalen Smith or something along those lines with your, probably at that point in time, taxpayer MLE, you get a vet minimum big break glass in case of insurance. You bring back Eubanks, whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. I think you're in a decent position, but this is what you and I have been talking about really since February. It's not about just this offseason. They do, in order to get to the next point, they do have to hit a home run this offseason. Mm-hmm. They do. They have to get one of those guys. They have to. Otherwise, the clock's ticking. And not just on Dame, but just on a reset in general.
I thought it was an interesting question, and forgive me, I'll scroll, see if I can find it here. But somebody had asked a question I saw through the thread, and I want to give them a shout-out. So give me a minute here, but I want to get to the question part of this. That was an interesting question. It's like, if you keep the 7th pick, the player, is there, and I'm paraphrasing here, is there basically a point to be made that just taking all this young talent and seeing what Dame and Ant do, re-signing Nurk, and this is on the assumption you swing and miss on OG, DeAndre, John, like you end up not having it, right? You don't get those chips. Is there a point that maybe just running it with the young unit, scraping and doing what you can to just make the playoffs, you get bounced early, but you made the playoffs with a young group and Dame. Again, we don't know the Dame timeline here, but you do that, and then you go into an offseason with maybe you have better assets than you thought. You have assets that stepped up, because for Portland to get to the playoffs with that situation, obviously Dame would have been playing well, Ant would be playing well, but like other guys I think would break through and maybe surprise you a little bit, right? Whether that's a Nasir Little, a Josh Hart, it basically was, if the swing and miss stuff happens, does it really have to be the end all be all of, you fight tooth and nail to get to the playoffs, you do it, and suddenly you have a couple assets that weren't there a year ago that you can maybe dangle over the next offseason to kind of build on? Because there's a real scenario they do swing and miss on these assets, that John doesn't go to Portland for a couple bucks, that OG goes maybe to, let's say, I don't know, fill in the blank, Toronto or something, or he goes to Utah and Rudy goes to Toronto. A scenario. I think it's fair to kind of wonder the opposite side of that, because again, Portland doesn't get nice things for me, and so I want to believe we have to live in a world where that conceivably happens, if not is the most realistic thing.
And let's finish the other side and then come back to this. The idea of getting all that stuff done, they would still have those young guys for the most part. If you're talking about like one of Nasir or Josh, Trendon, Greg Brown, possibly Keon, I would imagine he's probably the capital that would go out in one of these moves. But the flip side is, if you don't use that trade exception by the trade deadline, it's gone. So it's an asset wasted in this scenario. And that puts them in a really, really, really bad position. Like, they have to find a way to get something with that, because part of that deal was to make that money slot open up. And if that slot goes unused, that is another asset lost for nothing. And that's where I get what you're saying, but I think you can not get that full line of the youth growth Like let's say, I mean, Nasir Little's heading into his 4th year. He's heading into his restricted free agency. He could pop, and maybe the Blazers are like, yeah, this is our guy, and he ends up being a guy, and you flip somebody else on this team, or you go down the route of you've got new ownership possibly in place, and you pay the money, and you re-sign him with his restricted free agency, and you have the ability to match and figure stuff out.
So I found the question. It's from @NerdRunner, and here it is exactly. Is it really a good idea to make a big swing now versus using the 7th pick, giving chances to Keon, etc., so that we don't sell extremely low on them, assuming Dame is back and drags us to the playoffs? Won't that set up better with more pieces, or alternatively tell us it's time to tear it down? Basically, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that those things will signal, though, even without that. And that's...
And I think it's better, by the way, to answer that question, it's better, in my opinion, to swing. You swing, you trade the pick if you can get one of those pieces. But I've told you before, if it boils down to, well, it looks like all we're going to get at best is Jerami Grant, man, you keep that 7th pick and you take that asset and you hope that you can develop them.
Yeah, and I again, like, I think there's a world where they can get Jerami Grant. I mean, they're getting, if they want Jerami Grant, they'll get him without using 7.
And that's kind of how I feel about it too.
And if the worst case scenario is that you get Jerami Grant with your TPE, and then you take number 7, I don't know if I'd call it a miss. Maybe call it a double. Like a single lets you legged out. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I can view it that way.
If you could manage to do all of this, well, if you could manage to keep 7, get Grant, and not give up Hart or Little, that's a double, right?
I liked your single analogy better.
Legged it out.
Yeah, because like Dame and Ant could be really, really good. It could be what we once saw with Dame and CJ at its top. That's entirely possible. I think Jerami would fit in really well. Plus, if Nurkic stays engaged, like, he's a good player. Not great, not amazing, but he could be a good player when he's engaged. Mm-hmm. You're relying on a lot of young assets and youth to kind of take that next step. It could look like a double by the end of the year, but I'm not putting a lot of eggs in the playoff basket.
The bar for expectations gets lowered pretty significantly.
Like what? Let's say that's what it is. What do you think Vegas says the over/under of that team is? Because I think it's around
44.
38.
Oh, and I'd say 44.
Yeah, see, I don't think Vegas would respect that group.
I think a healthy Damian Lillard.
But that team last year, just coming into
was
the
47 and a half.
Oh, I don't know if it was that high. I think it was 44.
I thought it was.
Let me look it up. I'll look it up.
I thought it was 46 and a half or 47 and a half. But again, I think even last year, if you've got a healthy Damian Lillard, that team wins 42, 43 games.
Yeah, he gets them to that point.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, coming into this year, Dame, Ant, Nurk, rookie pick Jerami Grant, that team wins 40, 43, 44 games. I don't think that's really too much of a stretch. And I've seen a lot of people ask, this is kind of a comment while you're looking up some stuff, is I had this comment on Blazers Edge on the last show too. There's a lot of people think that, well, what if they got Grant and Collins and you put Jerami Grant at the 3? It's a lot like playing Robert Covington at the 3 or Zach Collins at the 4, as in you don't want to do it. Like, it's just because somebody has the size doesn't mean necessarily. It was a lot like Larry Nance at the 4. It was just like, that doesn't quite look right. He's a small ball 5 or a backup 5. Like, that's where he's optimized. When you start putting, I know as much as somebody who's been beating the drum of you want to get more size. Size played out of position is almost as bad as too small in a position. Now, you can overcome some stuff, but sticking Jerami Grant to the 3, who has been basically a 4 exclusively for the last 4 years, he slid up, I think, more to the 5 than he has or down to the 3. Like, right. he's a little bit different than I think people expect him to be. Like, it's like, oh, he's a long rangey wing. It's like, yeah, but he's a big wing.
44.5 was the over/under. I think the other part of this too. I think the other part of the Grant thing that you're mentioning is how many people, and this is not meant as a shot, but like I think it's a reality. How many people have been watching him in Detroit? If we're being really honest here, like
you're not watching League Pass on Jerami Grant.
No, you're not watching Detroit Pistons basketball. So I think you're thinking of Denver. And when we saw him in Denver a few years back, he kind of fit more that mold you're talking about, right?
Yes, which is why he went to Detroit to get away from that.
Yes, he got away from it, yeah.
I want to go score, and here's the other thing. If you're talking about Jerami Grant offensively, what makes him good is that he's quicker than most fours. So when you play him up at the 4 where he should be, he can take advantage of those things because he's got a decent handle. But the second you slot him down at the 3, right, he's not slow. He's just slower than most 3s.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. It's like Kyle Anderson, slow-mo. That's slow. But at the 4, he can do things that puts other 4s in a bad position. You put him at the 3, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, crap, he's screwed.
Yeah. So,
while Grant is not in that same boat, you can kind of think of it the same general way. I think that would be the way that I would try to put it together. Alex asks, what's better, the 7th for Collins or the 2025 pick for Grant? I honestly think John Collins could be available for less than the 7th pick.
I talked with a dude from Atlanta on Friday on my radio show, and he thinks that's a possibility.
Because the folks that I've talked to have all said that the Hawks would jump at 7 for John Collins.
I would imagine they would.
That's peak value.
Right.
So if the Blazers did, let's say the Blazers did send 7 for Collins. If they got Collins in 16,
I'm in 100%.
I think that's probably about, like, if you're trying to, if you're throwing the dart at the dartboard, peak value for the number 7 pick for return, John Collins in 16
that's
is
pretty good.
Probably right about the sweet spot.
Yeah. Because you could still, depending on what Joe would identify in this draft or how he would view it, I mean, you could still be looking at potentially down the road one of the bigs that ends up falling in this draft.
One of those bigs will probably end up being there. I don't want to say probably, because I think Duran's probably gone in the top 10, 11. Williams' range is anywhere from basically 9 through 20.
Right.
But again, there's also, you could see a Sohan or an Eason fall or something along. I don't think that's likely, but Nasir Little wasn't supposed to be available when the Blazers picked.
And he fell all the way to what, 21st, 21,
24 that year?
Was it 24? Yeah,
he was a lottery pick. His agent wouldn't let him work out for the Blazers.
That was a top 10 player by every estimation going into the draft. He was on the stage in
Cam Johnson was in the 20s, and he went at 11 to Phoenix. Yeah, that's basically what happened. Yeah. So you just never know about that stuff when it comes up. But of all the guys that are out there right now, Collins feels like the one who's the most likely to get traded draft night. Not necessarily to the Blazers, just most likely to be traded. I think that relationship has run its course. Somebody asks, is the Grant deal basically done? I don't think so, because Detroit has asked for pretty extensive returns for Jerami Grant, because they're going to start up here before they take, because we're still, what are we, 11 days from the draft? Yeah, we're 11 days from the draft. Those offers are going to, they're going to come down.
Yeah.
And the Pistons, if they're looking at things right now, they could hold out to the trade deadline. But at that point in time, then they're losing somebody for nothing if they don't get it done. And they may irritate Jerami Grant as a representation by doing so.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, because when they get to that point, then you're not doing a sign and trade, or excuse me, a trade and sign type situation where Grant would be extended at $28 million. That's why I think the Grant deal is also one of those things that's going to happen at the draft night, just based on how it would keep things going, how it would keep guys happy. Again, not necessarily to Portland. That's just, again, that's kind of where it goes. Another question we had in here, and again, thank you, Jared. It was a really, really good question, because that's one we've gotten a ton of. I got a couple different versions of who are MLE targets. It's hard to narrow down what Portland or who Portland's going to go after. I accidentally closed my tab here real quick. Who Portland would go after in the MLE or TP MLE markets, mostly because we don't know who they're going to get right now.
Right.
And I need to find my free agent.
That's always kind of been my biggest difficulty. Not that I'm Mr. Salary Cap guy, but when people are asking me that question, I'm like, well, I mean, I don't even know what the major move is going to be. Is it going to be John? Is it going to be DeAndre? Is it OG? I think a lot of it hinges on what happens in that regard with the 7th pick and what kind of player they get with that.
And not just that, just like, how does that all shape up? What does the rest of the market end up looking like? Who gets traded where? Where does that shake something else at? Where did it go? I need UFAs. Thank you. And one of the guys we've talked about a ton is Mo Bamba. And while I am a early adopter to Bamba Island, it does sound like that he may already be kind of locked in somewhere.
New York, baby, the Knicks.
I've heard a lot around the Knicks lately. And he's from New York. I think he's from Harlem. But I know another one that's kind of favorites out there is Jalen Smith, who had the wonky contract with Phoenix and was ultimately traded to Indiana. I could very much see that being a guy that Portland goes after. That makes sense. You're talking about youth. I think he's, 23? A lot of size, a lot of upside. Has shown some things as far as like what's going to matter for them long term. The Blazers made an offer to JaVale McGee last year. I think it was slightly above the minimum or at the minimum. And remember, JaVale played in the Olympics with Damian Lillard. The JaVale pitch was on behalf or behest of Damian Lillard. Dame wanted JaVale here. I think that would be a solid way to go. I think it's very much unlikely that there's going to be a ton of bigs on the market. I can see Boucher getting way above market value because of the lack of real bigs on the market after DeAndre Ayton Nurk. Like, that's kind of the pecking order, and Boucher's kind of a quasi-big shot blocker, three-point shooter. I don't know how to really qualify him. Slow-mo, I could see getting a full MLE. I don't know if the taxpayer mid-level is going to be enough to land him. The other interesting ones I think that are out there, if you're looking for kind of like wing depth, or TJ Warren and Jeremy Lamb. It all depends on what you have. If you're the full MLE or taxpayer mid-level, obviously the taxpayer mid-level drops you down pretty significantly.
Yeah.
And in that case, like, are the Blazers looking for, vets that can contribute, or are they maybe willing to take a risk on some younger guys? Like, are they looking to swing a little bit more? Like, are they hoping to, lock down a guy like a DJ Augustine to be their, or not even on their MLE, but like on their vet minimums? Like, what are they looking for to fill out the rest of the roster? And then you can kind of build from there. Like, are they looking at like maybe one of the Morris twins on their BAE? Like, I think those are the kind of the things, like, the questions you have to ask are which salary slots are
hell
available.
yeah, by the way.
You want one of the Morai?
Yeah. We haven't had a Morai
type.
Ever. I mean, we need a type like that. It's been a long time since we've had a player of that caliber. Give me 6 points and a lot of attitude.
By 6 points, you mean a complete a-hole.
That's exactly what I'm looking for. Let me ask you. Can I ask you a quick question though on this stuff? How much of this, how much is up to Dame? I'm curious about this part of it, because Dame is probably his most vocal he's ever been of, hey, I'm going to kind of be involved with this stuff, right? And there's been a lot of ties to him and Jeremy Grant. You mentioned he wanted JaVale McGee last year because they had a relationship from Team USA. I'm really curious how big or important Damian Lillard's going to play a factor in this stuff in terms of what they ultimately land. Like, if anybody is going to finally break through and maybe for even a year or two dispel the Portland small market stuff, I don't know if you could be asking for a better example of a player to do that than Damian Lillard. And it's not to say if he strikes out on OG or, fill in the blank of the big names, that it's Dame's fault, he didn't get anybody. But I'm really curious how much is going to hinge on what his ability is in terms of the relationship department and getting people to understand, hey, we're building something here, be with us for a couple seasons and see where this goes.
I mean, I think we're already seeing that Dame is having some feedback. I have to take turns here with each puppy to give them both attention, because
I was going to say they must be jealous.
They 100% are. So they love each other, little big sister, little brother. But if one gets attention over the other one gets very, very, very jealous and starts whining very quickly. I mean, they're little puppies. He's 16 weeks old and she's 16 months. So little wine bag, love you. But I think we're already seeing that Dame is very much involved. I mean, OG Anunoby is a guy that he's friends with. Jeremy Grant is a guy he's friends with.
DeAndre, the rumor ran wild, and he posted on Instagram, like, Dame wants to play with the DeAndre Ayton type. Like, it's out there. I'm not saying he's not trying. I'm just more curious
I think it's the most involved he's ever been.
Yeah, like I'm curious how what that results in, and maybe it results in a great offseason for Portland. Maybe it results in the typical Portland offseason of, hey, we got Kent Bazemore. But I'm still kind of curious where it's going to ultimately land, given how involved he seems to be with the process.
Yeah, I think that does change some things. And Austin asked a good question here. Was getting some contributors through trade on draft night, would it make it easier to convince guys to come to Portland on the MLE? Yes. If it's the right guys that are out there, yes. There are guys in the league that other players want to play with.
Absolutely.
That's a real thing. And there's other players in the league that other players don't want to play with. And as the Blazers have Damian Lillard now, and there's some space, and the stylistically of the basketball, Chauncey Billups, Joe Cronin, like all of that stuff matters in the sense of who may or may not want to come here going forward. And the extent of that, I'm really interested in knowing how impactful that's going to be. Because let's say the Blazers do the unthinkable and they land multiple guys. Do you think the tone of how Portland is viewed changes?
100%. If you're getting some of the dudes that are rumored, yeah, 100%.
If they get one of those guys, when for almost 10 years, we were told by the previous management that you can't get guys to come here.
Nope.
If they can do that with one guy, you're changing how things are. If you can do that with two guys, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It is no longer then you're looking at the other guy like, really? And then you're looking at the new guy going, okay.
I mean, I still look back, despite what the new guy may or may not accomplish, I still look at the last guy and go, really?
Yeah. I mean, now it would be with, utmost prejudice.
I mean, that would be, yeah, there's no arguing the point of what that stuff was.
Yeah. So, does it change things? Yeah, I think it does. How much it changes things? I don't know. And honestly, it's one of the questions that I have kind of going forward is how impactful is that stuff going to be? One of the things I wanted to address is there was a really good question in here about a lot of the questions really in general, like talk, rumors. The idea of Portland being in everything, whether it's Brad Beal or Zach LaVine or Deandre Ayton or OG Anunoby or Jerami Grant or John Collins. In my life, the Blazers have never had a summer like this where they were tied to everything. Mm-hmm. Can you think of another time where they were this tied to everything, to every major move that was basically listed out there?
No. This is the rarity for Portland where, maybe they've been talked about in the past, but in terms of the rumor mill stuff going this hard with them, I mean, I'm sorry. There was no social media in the 90s, the 80s, the early 2000s. Like, this is it for this franchise. They've never been involved in these kind of headlines ever. This is the first in franchise history.
And I think you're seeing a lot of reactions to this being the first time.
Yeah, for sure.
Some underreaction, some overreaction, some how do I react? Like, what's real and what's fake? And there's another question in here. First of all, Colby McLaughlin, is this the most rumors we've ever heard about Portland ever? That was one of the questions that we had in here.
1,000%. Yeah.
Alex at AALax1, do you have an example of how in-depth a front office will go to putting up a smoke screen on a player that they want to draft, trade, sign? I mean, an easy one to call out is Neil Olshey used to work out every single one of the guys that they drafted. Every single one. For I think it was his first 6 years or 7 years. Every single player that he drafted, he worked out. And then I think it was the last 3 or last 4 years. He drafted players he didn't work out. Mm-hmm. But there was a pattern. You could just go, oh, yeah, no, they're drafting one of these guys. So that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Or he signed or traded for him. Simo Harkless brought him in for the workout like 4 years later.
Basically, everybody he had in 2016, 2017 in for a workout. That was another thing. Like when I called free agency last year with Zeller and Snell, when it was one of those things where it was like, how did you know that? It's like, well, I had a little bit of sourcing on it. But number two, like they had Cody Zeller number 2 on their board in the 2013 NBA draft.
Which is
hilarious.
Wow. Al-Farouq Aminu, drafted by who?
By Neil in L.A.
In L.A., yep.
So he only came back really to what he knew.
Yep.
We don't know about Joe. We don't know how much of this is agent favors. We don't know how much of this is smoke screens. We don't. I will just say this: the noise around OG, and I've told Brandon this, came out. Him and I talked about this in mid-March, before we ever started talking about it on the show, because there were rumblings back then, and I was like, I don't know how much juice there is to this, but from where I got it from, it's about as well placed as it gets. And then 2 months later, fast forward, it's like, no, OG has been talked about. And the same thing with Ayton, and then obviously Jerami Grant, and then Collins recently. How much of that is real? I don't know. We'll know in 12 days. I'm going to look real stupid if they don't land a single one of them.
Well, but yeah, I mean, you might look really stupid the day of the draft if they don't land them, but does that mean there's not a trade coming? Because
No.
Cleveland had an indicator that LeBron was coming back. They still drafted Andrew Wiggins number one.
He was still the presumptive number one in that draft, but
right.
The only way that happens is if they string some things out for Ayton, I think, in my opinion.
Sure.
But maybe there's a bigger deal. This is something we haven't talked about a ton. Maybe the Blazers keep talking about like these one-off deals, 1-for-1 kind of situations, 2-for-1 swaps, whatever. What we haven't really talked about are the Blazers getting involved in another 3-4-way deal. And one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot is that this is going to be a really, really active draft day with trades. Because free agency looks very limited and free agency is a week after the draft, it's going to be really interesting to see, because if teams want to improve, if they want to shake things up, it's not through free agency this year. Like, it's going to be some changes, but the real changes are going to come via trade. And so on draft night, I would expect there to be a ton of talk leading up to that day, and then that night, if there's 15, 16, 20 trades, I'm not going to be surprised.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about draft picks. I'm talking about players moving sides, because teams want to have the big moves done that night so that they know what the hell they're going to do in free agency.
It helps their salary cap space too, because you sign free agents July 4th. Like, you have about a week and a half, 2 weeks to kind of have that locked up.
And so you want to get this stuff done as soon as possible. Now, the conflicting side of that is, why aren't we seeing moves happen right now? Because you're not going to see it until draft night. Because that's when the pressure is like, that's when you have to make a decision. And NBA executives are not creatures of the word I'm looking for. They're not reactionary.
Yeah.
They are not going to do it until they're absolutely forced to do, because they could very easily, Brandon, you know this, have these discussions. An offer could be on the table of 7 and Hart for OG Anunoby. We won't know. Let's say that Joe Cronin and Masai Ujiri have sat down. It's gone beyond the assistant GMs, and they're having those discussions. They could both still back out.
Yeah.
And you don't know until that moment. And I think that you're going to have, pull up the Moneyball sequence. Back and forth, phone call. I need you to stock my vending machine. I love that line.
Right.
But I think those are the things that you're waiting for that night. And that's what we've kind of driven home, is like, let's see what things look at on August 1st.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how wrong or right you'll be on OG. Because OG, look.
I have gotten murdered by all of Toronto right now.
It's not even close. It's OG is the most controversial one for you. I know DeAndre would be great. I've said that before. Like, yeah, pay him the contract. I don't care. I take that all day. But I'll tell you right now, interesting article raised, and I forgot where I saw it, but basically, like, why would DeAndre want to go to Portland? Wouldn't he just become basically what he already is in Phoenix? And my counter to that would be, well, it's a new scenery, right? It's a new look. It could be a different situation. You don't have Chris Paul. You don't have Devin Booker. So you don't know what it's going to be. But the OG one, oh, Danielson, the OG one, if you're right, oh, you're going to be so great. If you're wrong, you're going to be the
I'm gonna get crushed.
Schmuck who does. Yeah, they're absolutely going to want to crush you.
Yeah, no, listen, that Toronto fan base.
They don't want to lose him. No, it's clear. They want him to stay in Toronto.
That Toronto fan base is rabbiting out of their freaking minds. I've gotten more DMs from any fan base ever. And it's funny because their fan base is and it's not like, it's big, but it's not that big. Like, I have gotten into it with Laker fans over the years who have literally tens of millions of fans. It's never this bad. Yeah. Toronto fans are rabid and out of their freaking minds. But I will tell you this. If he is traded, not even to Portland, if he is traded, the petty wars that I will have with all of Toronto for the next 3 months, I
mean, they could easily respond, hey, man, he didn't go to Portland, but you'd still get the ultimate laugh of, but you guys told me he wasn't going anywhere.
And listen, what I have said from the jump is, I think it's a 50-50 chance that he gets. I'm sorry, there's a what did I say? It was a 30%, a 33% chance, a third chance that he gets moved. And I think if he gets moved, it's basically a coin toss between Portland and the field, because I very, very, very much believe that they are trying to drive OG to Portland.
Well, then I would imagine OG's a part of that. Like,
yes,
I think that's the thing about this is there's a lot of teams. Not everybody hates the player, right? The player wants to trade. Not every team's like, oh, you want to trade? Screw you. They'll work with the player because it's good to keep relationships up. It's good to be known as the franchise who treats their dudes right. If he goes to Portland, you would assume that OG was kind of driving
the driving
right?
force behind it.
Absolutely.
And if you want to look at a couple different situations, they're all very unique. James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge. I think LaMarcus Aldridge and Dame are very, very similar situations as OG and Scottie, where everything was probably just fine and they could be best friends. But the reality is 2 years ago, year and a half ago, OG was listed as basically Kawhi 2.0, and now Scottie's taken his shine. You can say whatever you want about an organization. These guys are alpha level, ego-filled maniacs, and I don't mean that as like a any kind of a negative thing. You don't get to this level in anything without having that. Mm-hmm. And with that, sometimes comes some fragility in those egos. And it could be nothing that Scottie Barnes did. But OG just was like, I'm not feeling this now. Because LaMarcus did that. And he has said a million times, I was too dumb, I was too young, I was too insecure in my own fragility, my own ego, and I wish I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. And Dame was basically like, hey, I was the wide-eyed, new guy to the scene.
And I said yes to everything.
With.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. And, and not to blame Dame, but like just to go to show you, like, there's a lot of both sides.
I don't think either side did anything wrong. I think both sides were just in a funky
I disagree
spot.
with that. I think we don't need to hash this out too hard, but like just using that example, like,
but you
LaMarcus
get what I'm saying, though. Like those are the
100%.
kind of situations that happen. You look at Kawhi, you look at James Harden. Yeah. Both those guys are anti-conflict. They said, "You don't like what I'm doing? Fine." One said, "I'm going to go to the strip club and eat chicken wings." The other one just sat out and said, "My uncle's going to handle this stuff." Mm-hmm. Didn't communicate. And you're talking about organizations with the Rockets and the Spurs, who historically at those points were well-run organizations.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep saying it could have absolutely nothing to do with Toronto or Masai or how well-run an organization is. It does not matter.
Yeah.
We'll get out of here on this. Improving the bench. And this is going to kind of come in tie into the MLE type stuff. There's somebody in there, I can't remember your name. I had it in there earlier, but kept asking for me to predict the starting 15 or the 15-man roster. I'm not going to predict it until after draft day.
I hate those. I got to be honest. I don't knock wanting to ask the question. I hate the question.
Listen, I will do it after draft day when I know like which way they'll go with their other exceptions and their vet minimums. I'll make some predictions on that. But looking at where they are right now, there's just they're missing two starters. And until you know who those two starters are and what they bring to the table,
right?
Whether it's a rookie, a vet, or in between, or they swap out Nurk for Ayton and they're trying to fight a way. There's just too many different ways it can go. But as far as improving the bench, I would imagine that they're going to target, not necessarily in prime, but I think they're going to take some swings on some guys.
Blevins.
No, unfortunately, he's run out of two ways. So Brandon Williams is the only two way they have on the roster right now. Trenton's got his deal. Greg Brown's got obviously his rookie scale deal. I wouldn't be surprised they brought Mac back. McLemore.
Okay, I'm not mad by that.
He was originally brought in because he's tight with Dame too.
Give me a 6'6" wing that wants to shoot the ball. I'm all in on it.
And he's all vibes.
Yeah, all vibes. Yeah, and he liked Portland. He did well here, I thought. So
listen, I had zero issue with Benny Mac. Like if they brought him back at a vet minimum, that's like, cool.
Hey, 3 or more games this past season.
He won.
You and I both were like, shit, they need to bench Ben McLemore because he's too dangerous to the tank. He
actually won them. One of those two games that they won they went 2-21 down the stretch. He won one of them.
Yeah.
He had like a 30-point night. I think he had like 8 threes or something like that. It was bonkers.
Yeah.
But as far as that goes, news and notes, there was no workouts this weekend. I have heard that the Blazers are going to have workouts, I believe, tomorrow and Tuesday. So actually, let me check right now.
Because we had the last one was Friday, and it was the 4 or 5 person workout, right?
With Eason.
Yeah, with Eason, yeah.
Yeah, let me check the media availability. So, yeah, the last one was Eason, Etienne, Kirkwood, Lofton Jr., Note, and Batty. And the last I had heard was that there would be some again at the beginning of the week. So I will not be going to any in the beginning of the week because I have stuff to do at the day job. But on Thursday morning, I'm going to jump on with you and we'll preview the NBA draft from 6 to 9 on 1080. So
yeah,
that'll be fun. I know you got to get out of here and go to the gambling show, so we'll get out of here on that. Thank you all for being here. Like, rate, review, subscribe, help us grow the show. You can find us on social media at Danny Marang, at Brandon Sprague, at Jack Ramsays. Email the show, jacksramsays@gmail.com. Again, thank you for all the questions. This is kind of where we're going to go until draft night. Draft night, we will have a live show. I believe the plan for right now is we will do the live show, and we will probably go into the second round. And then depending on when the Blazers have their press conference, I may haul ass down to the practice facility and see if we can get live from the press conference.
Okay.
That's kind of what we're going to do to kind of figure some stuff out and see how that's going to work. Because there's usually about an hour between when things finalize because they're making some phone calls, congratulating. They're also going through and doing the undrafted guys to get training camp invites and summer league stuff all worked out. So thank you guys for being here. We will have some again once they make some moves draft night, I will be dropping some videos on some guys. I'm already grabbing some film together for everybody for all the guys that have been named. I'm probably wasting some time on some of this stuff, but that's okay. That I'll have some videos out for you guys, and we'll also do a post draft either the day after or the next day. We'll do a Jack Ramsay's members kind of AMA live show for you guys to kind of get involved in, because I know we've been slacking behind on the membership stuff, and I want to make sure you guys feel like you're being rewarded for it. So other than that, for Brandon, I'm Danny. Thank you all, guys. Brandon's going to go do his show. We will be back Thursday. I always forget which days they are. So it'll be
6 to 9 a.m. on the Fan.
Yeah, and then we'll do it again for the live show later from 6 to 9 p.m. No, I'm kidding. Well, until then, guys, take care. Talk soon. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the crappy weather.